You hand your card to a stranger at a coffee shop and trust them not to steal your number. You get into a car driven by someone whose name you learned 30 seconds ago from an app. You leave your child with a babysitter you met twice. You walk into a city of 9 million people who could, in theory, do anything to you, and you walk through it without a second thought. This should not be possible. For the overwhelming majority of human history, you lived your entire life around the same 50 to 150 people. This number comes from the work of anthropologist Robin Dunbar, who found a consistent ceiling across human social groups, tied to the cognitive load of tracking relationships. Everyone you encountered repeatedly. You knew their face, their family, their reputation, their debts to you and yours to them. There was no such thing as a true stranger in the modern sense. There was only the group and everyone outside it. And everyone outside it was, statistically, dangerous. Anthropologist Napoleon Chagnon's extensive fieldwork among the Yanomamo people of the Amazon, though later contested in its specifics, opened a wider body of research into small-scale societies, showing that a significant percentage of male deaths in many non-state societies came from intergroup violence, conflict between people who did not share a group identity. Outsiders were not a neutral category. They were a leading cause of death. A brain that evolved in that environment had every reason to treat an unfamiliar face as a threat first and ask questions later, if it asked questions at all. This created what evolutionary psychologists call the in-group bias, a default suspicion toward anyone outside your immediate social circle, paired with automatic trust toward anyone inside it. Psychologist Henri Tajfel demonstrated in a series of landmark studies that this bias forms astonishingly fast. In his minimal group experiments, participants were divided into groups using something as arbitrary as a coin flip or a preference for one abstract painting over another. Within minutes, people began favoring members of their own randomly assigned group and treating the other group with measurably less generosity and more suspicion. There was no history, no shared experience, no real stakes. Just the bare fact of categorization was enough to activate the ancient machinery of us versus them. If this machinery is so old and so easily triggered, the real puzzle is not why you sometimes distrust strangers. The real puzzle is why you ever learned to trust them at all. The answer begins with something that should have been impossible: trade. At some point, deep in human prehistory, a person from one group had to hand an object to a person from another group and walk away without it ending in violence. Archaeological evidence of long-distance exchange, obsidian tools found hundreds of kilometers from their volcanic source, seashells found deep inland, shows that this was happening tens of thousands of years ago, far earlier than most people assume. Economist and anthropologist Joseph Henrich has argued that the capacity for trade between unrelated strangers may be one of the rarest and most important adaptations in human history, distinguishing our species from every other primate. Chimpanzees, our closest relatives, do not trade with unrelated strangers. They cannot build the cooperative trust. Humans, somehow, found a way. That way was reputation. The earliest trust between strangers was never blind. It was built on what game theorists call indirect reciprocity, the understanding that even if I never see you again, others might. If you cheat me, word travels. Your name, in whatever form names took in small early societies, becomes attached to the act. Biologist Robert Triver's foundational work on reciprocal altruism, combined with later models of indirect reciprocity, showed that cooperation between unrelated individuals can be evolutionarily stable as long as information about past behavior can spread through a population. Trust, in other words, did not evolve as blind faith in strangers. It evolved as a bet, a calculation that the stranger in front of you has more to lose from betraying you than from cooperating. This is why trust scales so strangely in the modern world. You trust an Uber driver you have never met more than you might trust a stranger who approached you on an empty street, even though both are, in the literal sense, unknown to you. The difference is the architecture surrounding them. The driver has a name, a photo, a license plate, a star rating, a company that can be sued, a digital trail. None of that exists for the person on the street. Your ancient brain is not actually evaluating the individual human in front of you. It is scanning for the proxies of reputation that it evolved to require. And modern institutions have gotten remarkably good at manufacturing those proxies artificially. This is also why a 5-star rating does something to your nervous system that no amount of verbal reassurance can match. Neuroscientist Paul Zak has studied the role of oxytocin, sometimes called the trust hormone, in economic exchange. His research found that oxytocin levels rise when people receive signals of trustworthiness from others, and that this hormonal response increases the likelihood of cooperative behavior, even with people they have never met. A star rating, a verified badge, a mutual friend, a uniform. These are not just information, they are oxytocin triggers, hacking a system that evolved to respond to the slow accumulation of reputation within a tribe of 150 people, now activated in milliseconds by a glowing icon on a screen. But the deepest answer to why you trust strangers may not be about reputation systems at all. It may be about something more fundamental that evolution had to solve before any of that could work: the ability to read another person's intentions in the first place. Psychologist Michael Tomasello's research comparing human and great ape cognition found something remarkable. Humans, almost uniquely among animals, are driven by what he calls shared intentionality, the drive to understand what another mind wants, to coordinate around a common goal, and crucially, to assume good faith as a starting point rather than a conclusion that must be earned. A human infant will follow a stranger's pointing finger to look at an object, inferring shared attention and shared meaning in a way that even our closest primate relatives largely do not. This capacity, present from infancy, suggests that humans may be wired with a baseline assumption of cooperative intent toward other humans, a default setting of tentative trust that then gets adjusted up or down based on evidence, rather than a default setting of total suspicion that trust must painstakingly override. This reframes the entire question. You are not fighting your evolutionary wiring every time you trust a stranger. You are using one piece of very old wiring, the capacity for shared intentionality and cooperative inference, to override another piece of very old wiring, the in-group suspicion that warned your ancestors about outsiders. Both systems are ancient. Both are still active in you right now. The reason modern life feels safe enough to trust strangers constantly is that you have built an entire civilization of proxy signals, badges, ratings, laws, institutions, uniforms, contracts that feed your ancient trust system exactly the kind of reputational evidence it was designed to look for, just compressed into a glance instead of a lifetime. This is also why trust collapses so violently and so fast when those proxy signals turn out to be fake. A scam that exploits a fake 5-star rating, a catfish profile, a uniform worn by someone with no actual authority. These do not just disappoint you, they violate a 300,000-year-old contract. Your oxytocin system responded to the signal in good faith. Your shared intentionality system assumed cooperative intent, and then the proxy turned out to be hollow.
the disproportionate fury people feel toward scammers, far beyond the actual material loss in many cases, reflects how deeply this trust system is wired into identity itself. You did not just lose money, you discovered that the reputation architecture you depend on every day, the thing that makes a city of 9 million people survivable, can be counterfeited. And yet, remarkably, the system holds. Most strangers do not betray the trust extended to them, most of the time, in most places. The reason is the same indirect reciprocity that built the system in the first place. The driver, the seller, the babysitter, they are also embedded in a network of reputation that they have far more to lose from violating than from honoring. Trust between strangers is not an accident or a fragile illusion. It is one of the most sophisticated cooperative technologies any species has ever built, layered on top of ancient suspicion, running quietly underneath nearly every interaction you have today. You walk through a city of strangers and feel, mostly, safe. Not because the ancient warning system has been switched off. It hasn't. It is still in there, still scanning, still ready to flare at the first missing badge or broken promise. You feel safe because, against extraordinary evolutionary odds, your species found a way to manufacture trust between people who share no blood, no history, and no future, turning the single greatest threat your ancestors ever faced into the foundation of every city, market, and friendship you have ever built.